said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
I said listen to all this, sir.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Gendering the concept of disability rights? What? Well, I guess it makes some convoluted sense in the context of feminists treating being female like a disability. The feminists of the organization behind the Women's March say feminists seek to break barriers faced by the disabled. Their description is a long-form rundown of conditions needed to live as a healthy, safe, and secure part of their community. That sounds like a noble goal, one that the disabilities advocacy and care community has worked toward for generations. It would be nice to have feminists catch up to that after generations of association between their movement and eugenics. Feminist eugenicists have always been all for disability rights, except, any kind of right to be protected during gestation, arguably the most vulnerable time in a human life, or the right to not have one's bodily autonomy violated via forced sterilization, or the right to have one's existence treated as legitimate rather than as nature's horrible mistake. Margaret Sanger, founder of the American Birth Control League, which later became Planned Parenthood, was a staunch proponent of aborting unborn babies believed to be handicapped and involuntary sterilization of the intellectually disabled. That attitude was carried through decades of feminists to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, telling Sunday New York Times Magazine reporter Emily Bazelon, "Frankly, I had thought that at the time Roe was decided, there was concern about population growth, and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of." There's a human rights focus for you. Such compassion. Of course, that's just the feminist eugenicist, right? Remember, feminism is not a monolith. Well, except when it comes to the way feminism's patriarchy theory bleeds all over the greater human rights advocacy community. 3 years ago, I examined an article published on Time.com. It said violence against disabled women was being ignored in several countries. As I dug through the story's references, I found a disturbing pattern. Feminist-led research by or cited by Human Rights Watch, the organization cited in the article, was documenting discrimination and other issues faced by disabled people of both sexes, including abuse and lack of access to medical care, but reporting them as if women were uniquely targeted and uniquely impacted. Various reports interpreted a lack of facilities dedicated strictly to serving women, overall low quality or availability of service regardless of the help seeker's sex, or the lack of abortion services in countries where abortion is illegal, all as discrimination against or neglect of disabled women. Instances of disabled men being similarly disadvantaged did not receive the same treatment. Human Rights Watch applied the same bias to research on sexual violence, reporting on prevalence data on the use of rape as a war weapon, which recorded victims of both sexes as if it is strictly used against women. This is important to this topic due to the fact that disability increases the individual's vulnerability to all abuses, including sexual violence. Further examination of their research on violence indicated that Human Rights Watch is using 2 other common feminist techniques for avoiding information that contradicts the victims must be female part of their narrative. One is only looking into women's experiences of genderless issues, and then reporting their findings as a women's issue. The other is attributing women's adverse experiences to being targeted due to their gender, but not attributing the same adverse experiences to gender when men report them. Through that filter, every disadvantage any women face becomes a women's issue, but no disadvantages faced by men are treated as men's issues. Meanwhile, in the U.S., where feminists have been active for 100 years, there are services for the disabled that are reserved strictly for women. This includes government initiatives like the Health and Human Services Department's website, womenshealth.gov's page on violence against women with disabilities, which provides information and links to resources for disabled women and their families. Want similar information for men with disabilities? A cursory look at menshealth.gov revealed that there are several interesting advertisements, articles, and other publications related to men's health, all of which were listed on the landing page my internet service provider shows when you try to visit a website that doesn't exist but has men's health in the URL. So, of course, there's no page on violence against men with disabilities at that address, despite the fact that, as reported by the Vera Institute of Justice, men with disabilities experience victimization, including sexual violence, at higher rates than men without disabilities, which means their disabilities are making them vulnerable to abuse, and not enough is being done to counteract that vulnerability. Oh, but Uncle Sam isn't completely devoid of advice for men with disabilities. The website for Selective Services advises, men who have a disability and who live at home must register with Selective Service if they can reasonably leave their homes and move about independently. A friend or relative may help a disabled man fill out the registration form if he can't do it himself. Men with disabilities that would disqualify them from military service still must register with Selective Service. The site goes on to explain that should another draft ever be enacted, upon examination a disqualifying disability would elicit deferment, and sufficient documentation of that disability can get deferment without examination. But registry is still mandatory unless the man is confined to the home or an institution due to his disability. In other words, if you can go sit on a park bench every day and watch the world go by, Uncle Sam wants a chance to get a good look at you before determining whether you can be exempt from the draft. Then, there is the crisis in care for disabled veterans who face inconsistent or even lack of access, long waiting lines, abuse, neglect, and dehumanizing failure of consideration under the grievously mismanaged Veterans Health Administration system. This impacts both sexes, but the vast, overwhelming majority of veterans are men, and the disparity only widens with disability. Women get government support for defending themselves or for their families to defend them against violence and other abuses. Men get government ordered to sign up to be potentially sent into the most violent environment known to humankind, only to be neglected or even outright abused by the very system that sent them there if they return with disabling conditions. And that's not the only systematic institutionalized discrimination disabled men and boys face. Feminism's history of attacks on due process rights has also hit the disabled, and again, especially men and boys, already disadvantaged in the criminal justice system, as we have highlighted in past episodes. Additionally, a 2015 report by the National Council on Disability stated, studies show that up to 85% of youth in juvenile detention facilities have disabilities that make them eligible for special education services, yet only 37% receive these services while in school. Let me remind you, Justice Bureau statistics show that 95% of incarcerated youth are boys. The report goes on to say, a disproportionate percentage of these detained youth are youth of color. These statistics should lead to the conclusion that many disabled youth in the juvenile justice and criminal justice systems are deprived of an appropriate education that could have changed their school-to-prison pipeline trajectory. The school-to-prison pipeline refers to policies and practices that push our nation's schoolchildren, especially those most at risk, out of classrooms and into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. This pipeline reflects the prioritization of incarceration over education. The ACLU has reported on conflicts between police officers and the deaf, who often get accused of resisting for failing to follow instructions they could not hear, and which, therefore, were not actually communicated to them. Disability can lead to a person failing to understand officers' instructions or commands, charges leveled against him, the nature and scope of his defense options, his attorney's advice, questions he is asked in court, and how to explain innocent but abnormal behaviors or conditions or adverse experiences without falsely incriminating himself in the eyes of police, court personnel, judges, and jury members. He may be unconvincing when telling the truth, easily tripped up or falsely made to look dishonest or incompetent to tell the truth by authorities attempting to catch him in a lie, or just to get another conviction under their belts. He may also be vulnerable to suggestion via pressure from authorities trying to get that conviction. A 2016 report by Respectability.org states that there are 750,000 adults with disabilities behind bars. That number is Respectability's estimate based on Bureau of Justice statistics indicating that 32% of federal prisoners and 40% of people in jail have at least one disability. More than 500,000 of them have cognitive disabilities. Justice Bureau data also reveals that the disabled are a disproportionately represented population in prison and jail settings. One survey found that 32% of prisoners have at least one disability as opposed to 11% of the general population. Another found that 40% of jail inmates have at least one disability compared to 9% of those in the general population. Prison inmates were 4 times as likely to report having a cognitive disability than the general population. Jail inmates were 6.5 times more likely. A higher percentage of incarcerated women than incarcerated men reported ambulatory or cognitive disabilities, but the overwhelming majority of incarcerated people are men, and in raw numbers, they report more of all disabilities. Further, reports also show that men are more likely to have a disability and not report it. The problem, however, is not just in the area of wrongful conviction. Respectability's report states that once individuals with a disability are in the system, they face significant problems including access to counsel, lack of accommodations, complex rules, systematic abuse, and solitary confinement. Many are abused behind bars. For example, people who are deaf or blind are put in solitary for years as, quote, an accommodation. However, evidence shows that this can cause them to have significant mental health problems. A 2017 report by the ACLU explains that prisoners in solitary confinement, a punishment reserved almost uniquely for men and boys, are often required by correctional facilities to go without the devices, services, and treatment they need to perform basic human functions and remain healthy, while they are held in small cells for 22 hours a day or longer for days, months, and even years. After being consistently failed by their schools, law enforcement, and the courts, incarcerated disabled convicts routinely face abuse, exploitation, and neglect that would land any other professionals responsible for their welfare in jail themselves. The ACLU's report, Caged In: The Devastating Harms of Solitary Confinement on Prisoners with Physical Disabilities, describes people with disabilities, mental and physical, left to languish in despair, isolated, shut off, and prohibited from gaining equal access to programs and services, and at serious risk of physical and psychological harm, especially in those facilities that are overcrowded or understaffed. The report highlights several areas of mismanagement and misconduct which lead to egregious treatment of disabled inmates, including decrepit and unsanitary living conditions, lack of access to health care, failure of facility staff to prevent violence perpetrated against disabled inmates by other inmates, and environments which exacerbate symptoms experienced by inmates with psychiatric conditions in ways that lead them to receiving more punishment. The ACLU's recommendation for reforms to end these deplorable conditions and the heinous treatment of America's disabled inmates include the suggestion that institutions which house disabled prisoners should comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act in terms of accessible design, inmate access to proper equipment, care and assistance, and rehabilitative programs. They literally had to suggest that U.S. government-run or funded facilities for penalizing criminal offenders should not violate federal law. Let that sink in for a moment while you remember that when we've previously discussed the prison system, we pointed out that feminist organizations have been fighting to replace incarceration of female convicts, and only female convicts, with rehabilitative therapy. If the Women's March wants to do something no other feminist organization deserves credit for doing, they should expand that advocacy to, at the very least, disabled inmates of both sexes. Or perhaps they should not push for due process violations that would so severely disadvantage that population in the first place. What do you think? Should we hold our breath and wait for that to happen? Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 28. Less Equal, Accountability Gap Enabled. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, and if you'll pardon the double entendre, the always foxy Anna Cherry, to enable you, our favorite audience, a more clear view of the hypocrisy behind yet another example of the Women's March co-opting a genderless issue. But before we get on to today's topic, a couple of reminders. If you want to join in the chat on YouTube, please go to the Badger Live Streams channel. If YouTube is experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and won't let you listen, we're also on Twitch and Facebook, because you can't keep a good badger down. And if you want to always be sure you'll be able to catch our live streams, even if YouTube decides to throw us in the gulag for wrongthink, or if you want to catch our show in its audio format, remember to go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications. Also, we are still raising funds to get our witnesses back to the courtroom for one more round against our opponent's fancy schmancy New York lawyer. If you want to help us with that, You can donate to the cause at feedthebadger.com. Now, I'm going to, before I introduce the rest of the topic, I'm going to address our first super chat. Joey Jojo gave us $10 and said, I am a short, ugly man with autism, and I hate my life. I wish I was dead. I am useless. Women hate me. I can't function with people. I am hated by everyone. I think I will snap. I want to hate people. One of the most invisible, disabling conditions out there is depression. And it's not always chemical. And it's not always easy for the people around the person to deal with, much less the person himself. But this is something that all of us have been through one way or another at different times in our lives. You hit rock bottom. You have moments where you just feel like there's nothing to live for. And then, in time, you realize again that there is. But first you have to get through those moments. And sometimes they can be really long. And sometimes they can be really dark. And sometimes they can be really hard. I had mine in a puddle of puke on the floor of my parents' bathroom. And when I realized how horrible it was going to be for them to walk in on my dead body, and I threw up the pills. And I realized that I had a choice to either deal with something horrible that was going on in my life that I thought I was helpless against, that I thought was going to go on as long as I was in school. And I didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. Or to hurt my family more than anything else in the world could hurt them. And it's a dark choice to have to make. And it's everybody's pathway out of that is going to be different. But I can tell you this. No matter how dark it gets, and no matter how hard it is right now, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And there is a way forward. And the first thing that you have to do is realize that it's not what other people think of you. It's not how other people react to you. And it's not whether or not you click with other people that decides who you are and what you are. It's you. You decide that. You are the one who chooses the person that you're going to be. You're the one who chooses the mark that you're going to leave on the world. You don't have to be Adonis to be loved. You don't even have to be any different than anybody else. And I don't know what else to tell you about attractiveness other than the thing that makes the biggest difference is with especially guys. You have to give a fuck about how you feel about yourself in order for other people to even begin to. It has to start with you. And it can. And you get all kinds of advice. Go to the gym, do this, do that. You know, all of it could be valuable, but none of it is a magic bullet. The magic bullet is you are important. Regardless. You're important because you're a human being. You're important because you have potential in your life. You're important because you have the capacity to touch the people around you. And you're important because your existence, in and of itself, without any other reason added to it, means something. And if anything has ever told me that in my life, it has been working with people with severe disabilities. And work with people who have it so rough that they have to be reminded to do ordinary things that you do every day, like swallow before you put the next bite of food in your mouth, so they don't accidentally kill themselves. Not all of them are quite in that position, but that can happen with intellectual disabilities. And I work with people that there are parts of society that would just throw them away because they can't work. They're not going to be anybody's best friend in the whole world. They're not going to be somebody you can depend on for anything. They are dependent. And there is value. There is amazing value in those people. Everyone matters.
Well, and there's another thing that's worth thinking about too. Like, I know that it can seem especially hard. Like, I know, Joey Jojo, you mentioned that you have autism, and I know that it can seem really hard to get through things when you're dealing with a disability. But I mean, like, there are people out there who have disabilities who can still achieve amazing things. Like, I saw recently, you might be able to look it up. In fact, it's the first result if you look up iron lung lawyer. And the video that I'm talking about is the story of a gentleman who is just amazing. He's one of the last survivors of polio, and he lives in an iron lung, and he actually managed to get his law degree while still having to deal with that disability. People can accomplish amazing things. And even though, like, it can seem like it's an endless path into the darkness, you just kind of got to work your way through it and realize that, it's you that has to get yourself through that tunnel, and that can be tough, but you can definitely do it. There is a light at the end. You just have to get yourself through that tunnel.
And of course, to add to that, there's a tremendous amount of depression, severe depression, that is triggered by inflammation. So your diet and any kind of mold, fungus, spore infestation in your home, which actually happens more frequently than you realize in America anyway, especially in wetter areas, not like in Arizona and the desert, but anywhere there's a frequent rainfall every month, like here in Sacramento. There's just weeks where it rains, and windows immediately become covered in this black mold, basically. And so between fungal infections and a diet that promotes inflammatory response, which is sad, the standard American diet. Standard American diet actually does promote inflammation. It is low fat, high carb, and that is exactly the opposite of what you need. Most of the time, you need good saturated fats. They really help your brain work. And that can lead to a tremendous amount of cognitive disability that is entirely based on your diet, and not to mention, of course, actual inflammation. So if you have any kind of allergic reactions naturally, a lot of times autism is comorbid with gastrointestinal issues where you may not be absorbing vitamins quite like you should. So heavy reliance on probiotics. Go outside for sunshine. At night, sleep with an eye mask or something like that, because in fact, just small amounts of light over multiple weeks when you sleep can lead to 65% increase in severe depression. So the modern way of living has given us depression. And the more you live like we used to, so less light at night, if not at all, more healthy diets that you would find in hunter-gatherer, so natural fats, healthy avocado, mushroom, seasonal foods, fruits, vegetables, less processed stuff, just basically simplified to a couple of 100 years back. And with the modern conveniences that we have, that takes care of some of the problems we used to have. But some of the food choices and some of the lifestyle choices that we used to have are actually better. And so it's one thing to say that, yes, you have to have self-confidence in a manner of speaking. You do have to reach that point where you decide what you want life to be and what you want your mind to be and how you're going to see yourself and life around you. But it's one thing to say that, and it's another to actually feel anything other than apathy, anything other than I just fucking want to die. So how do you get your mind to want to do things? Diet, exercise, sunshine. It seems simple, but a tremendous amount of our lifestyle contributes to depression through light exposure at night and through inflammation-inducing diet. So I just want to throw that out there as something you can do, something concrete that you can do and start seeing results just from that. And then a lot of things that were previously mentioned by Hannah and Prim will happen as a result of that. So you got to get your mind interested in doing things. And a lot of that is just reducing inflammation.
Yeah, that definitely does seem to make a big difference. That was actually one of the things when I had to be treated for depression. That was one of the things that my doctor had me do, was a change in diet, a change in activity, and stop hiding indoors. And I've never been diagnosed with autism, but I hit all the symptoms of Asperger's. It didn't exist as a diagnosis when I was a kid, and I didn't go back to get checked again when it was added. And I wouldn't be very surprised at all if I were to get diagnosed with it if I went in and actually had somebody check. So this is something that this kind of hits me. I understand at least those aspects of it. I'm not a guy, so I've never lived on that part of the social ladder where guys live when they have everything that you're dealing with in their lives. But hell, the only other thing I can say is that aspect of not giving a fuck whatever other people think in terms of determining your value as a person. That is the thing that in the long run, for me, made the biggest difference regarding the really dark thoughts, the really suicidal thoughts, the destructive thoughts and everything. Was like, who the fuck cares? What do other people do when they get upset? What do other people do when they have a rough time? You have to decide that it is your determination, not other people's determination, whether or not you have value. And it took me probably a good 10 or 15 years before I got to that point. So I'm not going to tell you, like, you have to wake up tomorrow and say, fuck it, everybody else's opinion doesn't decide whether or not I'm a valuable person. And it doesn't mean that you discount every bit of advice that people give you on character development and stuff like that. What I'm basically saying is, don't let yourself be treated like a person who doesn't matter. And don't let yourself be convinced that you don't matter because someone else is an asshole. Because the world is full of assholes. We have some assholes in our chat right now. They really don't give a shit. And they matter as people, but they don't matter to the show. They don't matter to what we're doing. And they don't determine the value of it. Just like the people around you, Joey, don't determine your value. You do.
Exactly. I mean, just look at how many examples we have of people who, people not believing in things that matter, first of all. And secondly, all the time you have instances such as, I wish I remembered the filmmaker's name, but he created this film that was considered, he was riding the wave of adoration, and he created a film that was just too much for people at the time. They didn't know what to do with it. And he was laughed out of the community. He was completely denigrated. Everybody thought he was a piece of shit. And then somehow, posthumously, magically, this film is now in the top 60 of UK. UK considers this film to be in the top 60 best films ever made. The UK. So many times we see that, where opinion of people, of groups, a lot of times it's just bullshit. It's just fucking bullshit. And on top of that, if you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, so no matter what you do, people treat you a certain way, then just be whatever the fuck you want. There's really nothing limiting you.
Exactly. Like I know when I was young, and when I had an abusive stepmother, when I was facing that that abuse, there was a time there where I was thinking seriously, maybe I should just end it all, because clearly I must not be that worthwhile of a person if I'm being treated like this. But then eventually I decided, no, you know, I'm not going to let my sense of worth be decided by somebody who clearly makes themselves feel better by beating on a little kid. So I got myself through it, and I'm really glad that I did. And things do get better. Like it might take a while, and it did take me a while. It took until I was obviously an adult before I was able to fully get out of that place and get on with my life, but it did eventually get better.
Right, and a little life hack, especially for men. So when you stop caring about people's opinions and to please them, I know it sounds like you're being an asshole, but at a certain point, especially if you do good deeds, if you do good things, you can objectively forget about your emotions, forget about what your gut is telling you. No, look at actual objective reality. You're a man, you can be rational. Just fucking look at it and be like, do I do things that improve other people's lives? Am I someone who contributes to society? And if you do those things, if you do help, if you do give of yourself to better the people around you, then their opinion is literally worthless. It doesn't matter. You know for a fact, an actual fact, that you're a good person. On top of that, a life hack for dudes: when you stop caring about pleasing people, women in particular, when you stop caring about their opinions, they suddenly care to please you. They suddenly care to prove themselves to you. So do not be afraid to be an asshole interpersonally in that sense, as long as you are actually being a good person otherwise. I'm not giving you just permission to just be whatever the fuck, but you know what? Maybe you need to. Maybe you need to get to that point where you just tell everyone to fuck off and see how it really doesn't change much. So if you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, there's really nothing that's socially inhibiting you like you think it is. And a lot of that pain comes from ultimately fear of death. And by fear of death, I mean you cannot reproduce, you cannot get a partner, you will be excluded from community, therefore just death. You're thinking with a primate in desert mind. And that mind is, if I don't have social interaction, if I don't have women who like me, if I do not have a partner to reproduce with, my genes, I am dead. The trick is to defeat that instinctual primate behavior. And how you do that? You can start by just not giving a fuck. And notice how liberating it can be, and then rebuild yourself from there.
Okay. Sorry, I'm like keeping up with our live show chat on this. I also, so I'm sort of back and forth here. But I'm gonna second that. And I'm also gonna point out, what I said about not giving a fuck. And it's, like I said, it can be hard. Everything people say makes a mark. Everything people do makes a mark. But you really can. You really can turn around and as hard as it sounds, shrug it off. And it's not that other people don't matter. It's that other people don't decide whether or not you do. I'm gonna go on with the super chats because I think we had some more. I'm trying to scroll up. I think we had actually. Joey answered us. So we said we had.
Yeah, there it is. I can read it if you want.
Yeah, because I can't find it.
It's Joey Jojo gave us another $5 and said, I can't do this. 30 years of loneliness and abuse. I'm done. And 40 year more. I'm sorry. This is my last super chat. I'm done. I'm fucking off. I'm really sorry to hear that you've been through that, Joey. Like, honestly, I really am. It's ridiculous seeing how sad you are often in the super chats. Like it even in the regular chat, it breaks my heart. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm glad to see you when you come in the chats every week. And like if you disappear, that's the people here are going to notice. It's going to be a sad thing, at least to the people here who you talk to on a regular basis. So I mean, I know it's small, but sometimes in these dark moments that can be enough, right?
Well, and it's not necessary to super chat, but
No, of
I'd
course
like to
not.
know if you're still out there in the audience listening right now, Joey. So if you are, say something, comment. And I know it's going to take about 30 seconds for you to hear this after I say it if you are listening, but let us know that you're still there, because that's actually a little scary to hear. And this is something that I don't want to panic anybody, but Joey, you sound suicidal, and I want to know what's going on. Is Joey still in the chat?
Yeah, I hope so. He hasn't been commenting in a while, but...
Okay, then.
It is unfortunate that sometimes that doing something like this is the only way people can get some attention. It's just unfortunate that we end up getting into such a mental cycle that all positive reinforcements and rewards, no matter how small they are, they just end up getting drowned in the noise of the way you feel of depression. And frequently you end up having people feel like the only way they can get love is by others feeling, scared for their life or afraid of them doing something, or in some sort of negative reaction. And it just kills me that we do not support each other and celebrate and bring attention to positive things people do. And I mean, so often you have kids. In fact, recently there was a guy who was a teenager who was going to shoot up his school, but then he came out of the bathroom, was about to do it, and then changed his mind and went back in and killed just himself. Now, when you look at what that kid was saying, he was saying that, he just wants to be noticed. A lot of times what happens in school shootings is boys desperate for attention, and what it ends up being, or attention, love, any sort of indication that the group gives a flying fuck. But because of that, we end up getting into sort of an unhealthy cycle of where your brain says that, you have to do some sort of rash, negative action in order to feel loved. And if there's some way to break that cycle, if there's some way to try to force your brain to look at positives, it doesn't matter if they're tiny, just silence all those voices that say, well, this doesn't matter, this is irrelevant, I shouldn't pay attention to this because it's too small. It's an aggregate. Every little thing is more than nothing. If there are positives, that means there are positives. So start looking at it that way, if possible. Yeah. So I don't really know what to do about that, but we're sort of conditioned, the boys and men and other people too in our society, to seek negative attention because it places attention. And it just really kills me that we need to do something as a group to try to uphold and see the positives in everything. And I think it needs to be a cultural shift more than just an individual.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, I deal with these kind of thoughts on a pretty regular basis, having volunteered with the crisis hotline. So I know what it means to have people like call in and be at the end of their rope. And unfortunately, like it's really sad, but unfortunately, a lot of the times the people that are suicidal are men at the end of their rope, feeling like there's no way out, that there's no supports for them, that there's nothing out there for them because it's all targeted towards like women and families and things like that. But like that's one of the things that we're trying to do here. We're trying to build support for men in our communities. I am trying my hardest to talk to as many people as I can in my work, in my school, in those kinds of areas of my life. I'm trying to build support for men wherever I can. And I know that all the other honey badgers are trying to do the same thing. These are people who are working so hard to try to build support for men in our communities. And honestly, to all of you guys listening, everybody can make even the small steps to try and, build that kind of support, even if we just challenge it when we hear people saying, oh, men, who cares about men? Well, that's not true. We all have lots of men in our lives that we care about more than anything. And so basically we just have to keep working at it. We have to try as hard as possible to, spread the word, remind people that men matter, that men are good, that we need to support them in their low moments just as much as we support everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a Discord for sort of the modeling collective agency, whatever the fuck. Everything that I do is under sort of top shelf models heading. And I have a Discord server that's free to enter for anyone. Of course, there's rooms for patrons only, but it's free. And we have one of the rooms is Cherryholics Anonymous. It's a place that's specifically devoted to that. It is a support group where there are men and occasional women who hang out and talk to you when you're there. They're there to catch you. We got a little net of concerned individuals, and we just keep growing it, and it's a beautiful thing. And so yeah, definitely Badgers individually and collectively is something that we're interested in doing, is to provide that support system for men and to have them understand that the world does care. There are people out there who care. So often you end up finding yourself blinders on because you are in the same job and the same living place around the same people, and they may not be all that good for you, and they may not, and you're in the same culture. You not only are in the same country, but you sometimes are in the same neighborhood. So you don't ever really get to see how wide and varied the world out there is. And that just by itself, realizing that there's other cultures who have different value systems, who may have value for men that the current American Western society doesn't, and that can be powerful in just itself. And if I were to go back here a little bit in our chat, we actually have a super chat from Cy Berserk, I believe, where he said, in response to Joey, is don't take your life. Your life will end someday. Don't throw away what has been borrowed to you and will be collected again when your time has come.
Yeah, and, well said. And thank you very much for saying that. I think it's something that needs to be said. It's something important that should be highlighted. All lives have matters, or have all lives matter.
And
all
have
lives
matter.
have worth.
You're right.
Yeah, we do have matter. Yeah, and
therefore we matter.
Exactly. But all messing up my words aside, it's true. Like it's worth it to stick around and see how things go. You never know how things are going to change. You may find in just a couple of days even things could improve. You never know. It could take a while. It could happen tomorrow. But the important thing is to continue trying to, just push through and
absolutely
make things work out. Yeah.
I would actually suggest checking out #Spoonie, which is another word for people with disabilities, or men in particular, and women as well. Those people who do not really want to use the word handicapped or disabled because they feel that they're greater than that it limits people's understanding of them. They often use Spoonie, and there's like a cute little theory behind why it's called that. Well, it's a cute theory that they take their name from, which is the idea is that you are normal people wake up when they have 20 spoons that they can use for things, and disabled people wake up with only 5 spoons, and so they need to ration those spoons. They're like, do I go outside or do I take a shower? Because I only have so much energy because of my disabilities to do stuff. So I actually follow a great an account that retweets wonderful things. It's Jesse Z Man, 2 N's, I believe. But there's accounts like that where there's men who suffer from depression and disability, depression because of their disabilities, and therefore becomes another disability. And they send out positive, affirmations, but positive in the sense that suicidal people may find positive, which is to others maybe a little dark humor at times. But one of the things that really brought to mind what you were saying, Prim, is one of the quotes I saw recently that was retweeted on my timeline from Jesse, was that if hope is too much to muster, then how about just morbid curiosity? Just stick around and see what happens. You don't have to have hope. You just see what happens. Just have some morbid curiosity about it.
Exactly. Like there was that one fellow who I think he went down to Mexico and spent a bunch of money on like drugs and hookers, and then after that he said he wasn't suicidal anymore. I'm not necessarily advocating doing that, mind you,
hey,
but I am
a change in perspective, that's all that it takes sometimes.
Exactly.
And the
But
thing
I think
that
Hannah's back.
yeah, the other thing that I found that worked for me was don't look at the rest of your life. Look at right now. Don't look for this is what I think the future is going to be. If you spend too much time focusing on that, if you spend too much of your focus on, I have all these years stretching ahead of me, and this is the way it's going to be right now, is the way it's going to be forever, that will drive you out of your mind. You could get hit by a car
and die tomorrow. You don't know. You could fall out of your bed and die. That does happen. So just focus on right now.
Yeah, that was actually one of the methods I considered, and it don't do that. But in any case, no, focusing on too much on everything instead of focusing on, the next 5 minutes, the next 10 minutes, what you're doing right now, what you're going to do tomorrow, what you want to do, and how to make what you want to do happen. And things like that.
That's the key right there. That's key, Hannah. Because we so frequently, when you talk about the future, you are imagining things. You don't know what it's going to be. And so when you have depression, you imagine negative things too much. And so you got to realize it is your imagination of the future.
And it is. It's your frame of mind. It's your frame of mind. And the hard thing is, like, everybody will tell you, suck it up and drive on. Well, there's a lot to suck up when your frame of mind is off. And that's what you have to work on first. Yeah. So, but I'm gonna read Darth Elwin's chat too. Darth Elwin gave us $20, and he said, "I'm severely disabled. I'm autistic, and I have something rare called DID. After facing sexual abuse and being defamed by a woman I trusted, I walked into traffic. But now I am on my way to publishing a novel. Have hope." And that's a thing that that speaks volumes, no pun intended, but you can make a change. One little change leads to a bigger change and a bigger change, and so on. The first change you make is deciding that it's up to you, deciding what to do.
Yeah, and that's really amazing, by the way. Like overcoming dissociative identity disorder, that's a really big one to have to deal with, and the fact that you're able to move through it and work to publishing a novel, that's really impressive. So, like, great work. Just seriously, high five to you.
Very much so. Very much so. That's not everybody who is completely easily abled. Not everybody who has what I guess feminists would call it ability privilege, has the capacity to write a book. Not if you're doing it with challenges, that's amazing. And I'm going to move the show forward because I think that there isn't anything else we can do on the air with this, and I can only tell you that we're doing everything we can in the background, and that is all I can say. But going on with the opening of the show, because this is a topic, this actually is our topic. And this, for the past few weeks, we've been talking about this kind of thing. We've been talking about the Women's March falsely gendering their talking points. We've been talking about the impact of falsely gendering human rights issues. And it's been a trip. It's been a hell of a trip. One consistent factor has been that specific behavior. The issues affect both sexes. Very often there are ways they uniquely affect men, that they uniquely impact on men. And yet we hear about how it has to be fixed for women, what has to be done for women, and why it's a women's issues. And they've continued that tradition with disabilities. According to their talking point, disability rights. They say, we believe that all women's issues are issues faced by women with disabilities and deaf women. As sisters, mothers, sisters, daughters, and contributing members of this great nation, we seek to break barriers to access, inclusion, independence, and the full enjoyment of citizenship at home and around the world. We strive to be fully included in and contribute to all aspects of American life, economy, and culture. And I gotta ask, does that last sentence especially sound to anyone besides me like they just called being female a disability?
Yeah, a little bit. It's kind of strange, and it's also strange how they separate women with disabilities and deaf women. Like, just why? Okay, why did they single that one out? That doesn't make any sense to me. But even still, like, why is this? Why are they focusing solely on disabilities faced by women? Because it's something that they can use to exploit, to say, oh, look, poor women, we suffer from this, and this is a women's issue. So it just kind of icks me out a little bit, actually.
Yeah, I suppose it might be. This is something that I've actually encountered in the real world, not the research world, but the actual real world, with sort of deaf assistance communities, because deafness is a disability that can be overcome by using an alternate form of communication and learning to read lips and things like that. A lot of people who are deaf don't want it thought of as a disability. And there's other people with other disabilities that have the same thing. They think of themselves as differently abled. When I was in high school and my life was constantly under threat by a health condition, and that at that time I didn't realize it was that bad. I would not have thought of myself as disabled, but my doctor did. Yeah, so I can understand that when they might say disabilities in deaf women, because they have people, the person who wrote it maybe has people that are part of the deaf assistance community and has dealt with being told this isn't a disability, and don't call it that. So that's a possibility.
That's true, but I just want to speak to something on that, just because this is kind of a topic that I've been dealing with a little bit in my class as well. They're talking about the disability versus differently abled thing. And I mean, on the one hand, I get why they think of it that way. They're like, oh, well, people who are disabled, like, oh, if you view them that way, you'll look down on them, like they're less good than able-bodied people. And it's like, I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that people ought to view people who are disabled as any lesser than, like, I mean, sure, they're, by definition, they're not fully functioning. So that's just going to be a thing that is the case, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're any lesser of people. You know what I mean? Like trying to say that, oh, this disability word, this word is a problem, we should come up with a different word surrounding it, is just kind of missing the point. If you know what I'm talking about, like it's not the word that's the problem, or it shouldn't be. It should be that, why would anybody see being disabled as being a bad thing, like as them being lesser people? Like it's hard to describe. I'm a little bit tongue-tied, but I hope that I'm coming across. It's not that people who have a disability are bad people, should be looked down on, but it's not the word that's the issue. It's the way that we treat people.
That's a big point. It's actually, that's kind of massive, and it's something that I don't understand. People who look down on other people in general. Everybody's different. Everybody's got something in their life that makes them unique in some way or another. Even if it's a small thing, it may be a small thing, maybe a big thing. One of my biggest inspirations, actually two of my biggest inspirations in life, I met when I was in elementary school and junior high. Both of them were confined to wheelchairs for their entire lives. One of them, his life was very short. My classmate with muscular dystrophy passed away in the 7th grade. But not before he inspired the entire class, everybody that knew him, to never give up. Not before he taught us all that you don't focus on what you can't do. You focus on what you can do. And you focus on making things that are hard to do, things that you can do. That was, I can't even begin to tell you the value of that lesson. And I would never have learned that lesson from an ordinary, able-bodied person. And I went to school with some kids that were unbelievable athletes, just absolutely unbelievable athletes. And I went to school with a kid who played football with a wooden leg. I went to school with a kid who played football legally blind. He could see shapes and colors, but he had to have a big magnifier and put his face right up against it in order to be able to see to read. And I had a teacher who had polio when she was a kid, and that was the other person confined to a wheelchair. And she handled the most difficult age group throughout all of public education. She handled the most difficult age group and taught them the most unexciting subject for most kids. She taught grammar to 13-year-olds and kept discipline even with the kids that were the most delinquent kids in town. And I was in that class because the year before I almost died from encephalitis and missed like 6 weeks of school and almost flunked the 6th grade with my supposedly genius IQ. So I was in with the kids that if they were going to give a teacher a rough time, they were going to give, those were the kids that were going to do it. And she handled them masterfully. And like I said, the idea of disabilities taking away from a person and making a person nothing or worthless, and the people that have that idea, they really miss out. They miss out on all of the really awesome things that they can learn from folks who have to overcome hardship. And I think part of the reason that I developed that don't give a fuck attitude towards other people determining my value as a human being. Now, I'm not going to say that you can't embarrass me. You can embarrass me if I did genuinely do something wrong and I hear about it from you. That's embarrassing and it makes me want to shape up. But I don't give a fuck if you think I'm worthless. I know better. And I know better because of the people that I grew up with. That's what the value of being close to someone with disabilities are. But I look at this talking point. This pisses me off. No, and it's not just separating deafness from others. It's this idea that feminism is about breaking barriers to access, to inclusion, to independence, and to the full enjoyment of citizenship at home and around the world for people with disabilities. Part of the reason that people who have something like autism and other intellectual or psychological disabilities that can cause social awkwardness, part of the reason that those areas of disability cause someone to be ostracized is because women judge when women should simply be experiencing life with other people. It's because women who control the social ladder, basically, turn around and treat people they don't even know like shit. It's because women use the word creep to describe social awkwardness rather than actual predatory behavior. And that's, so this idea of feminism treating this as their talking point, they got a lot of gall.
Yeah, for sure. I think I didn't want to go ahead because
I was just saying, I thought I heard somebody starting to speak up, and I waited, and then nobody spoke up.
I just wanted to give Anna a chance to say what she was going to say beforehand, but.
Well, yeah, it just was a little more topic where something, Hannah, was the way you were phrasing things. It kind of reminded me that we need to make sure that People realize that this admiration for people with disabilities who do things, it doesn't have to be about other people. You can see that in yourself as someone with disabilities. You can see how you are differently abled, and you have positives that other people may not have because of their neurotypicalness, whatever. And another greater point of why have we been, we're talking about, we're not trying to say, well, look at Stephen Hawking, he had a disability and he was funny and you can do it too. No, the point is, if another human can do it, so can you. If another human with the same problems as you can do something, so can you. You have all the same makeup. You have the same genes or same problems, same whatever. We're all essentially alike each other in general ways. And so that is something that was very powerful. People I've known in their childhood where, for instance, physical feats, saw somebody, standing on their heads. They're like, well, if they can do it, why can't I? So that sort of attitude is very useful to realizing, to underscoring what we're talking about. We're not saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, We're talking about recognizing your ability that you may not be aware of because you're just so stuck in that mind frame. You're stuck in depression. You're stuck in a worldview. And we're trying to say, hey, that worldview, it's based on your experiences. And your experiences have been shitty, but that's not all there is. Whenever you say you've flipped a coin and it came up heads 100 times in a row, what is the chance it's going to come up tails the next time, 101st time? Well, it's still 50-50. The chance has not changed regardless of the stacking of the negative numbers. That's what happens with random numbers, random events. They stack in a way that makes you feel like, oh, well, everything's going to be bad. Everything's going to be terrible, or vice versa. But ultimately, you have to realize that your prediction, your probability calculation has to do with your experiences. And you haven't been everywhere in the world. You haven't met every human in the world. You haven't had every different idea or worldview in the world. So by realizing that it is a predictive algorithm that is based on skewed results, based on previous results that may not be reflective of the entire sample. It's small. So you got to keep going, got to keep trying, got to keep sampling, and realize that what you're experiencing is an irrational emotion. It is an emotion. Your prediction, your view of the future is imagination. It is emotion. It is based on your experiences, but that is not objective. It really isn't. And so if it's going to be objectively negative, subjectively negative or subjectively positive of how you see your future, why not be delusional? Why not be crazy in the sense of seeing a positive future, seeing exactly what you want out of your life? Now, we call this in Hollywood and in the liberal circles, it's manifest. When you give an intention to the universe and have it come true. Like the secret is based on that in part. Now, there are ways in which this works neurochemically and psychologically, and I can get into that, and I have got into that in Cherry Stem. But the point is, the future that you have, the negative future that you're seeing, why do you believe that that's more likely than a positive future? Well, because your emotions are telling you, your emotions based on your bad experiences are telling you that. But things can change any day, any minute. There could be a massive flood. There could be a massive, earthquake. There can be complete change of people's attitude towards things. It has happened over and over and over. Like, the Bible says, or whatever, this too shall pass. There's an idea that, positive or negative, whatever it is, it'll pass. Nothing is as concrete as change. Like, that is one constant in the universe, it's change. And so because of that, you have to realize that your negative or your predictions of the future that tell you, well, I'm just going to be abused for the next 40 years. Well, yeah, with that attitude, basically, the idea is you got to sort of see what you want in life. And it's not that easy, I understand. But if you see your negative views or what you expect to happen as simply an emotional calculation based on your shitty experiences, that can help you break out of that. And you can start seeing, well, I can just believe anything I want then. And so often that happens. We see that when a child changes schools or when they move somewhere where nobody knows them, they feel free to be anyone they want. And so there's been people who've done this all the time. They just create a new personality for themselves. They sometimes talk with an accent. They do something completely new because they don't feel bound by the expectations of people around them. Well, you are constantly bound by others and your own expectations. So that mind shift, that frame shift that you need to do relies on understanding that what you're feeling is emotional. It is not a logical, objective, reasonable thing. And I think for men especially, that can be something to grab hold of and to sort of, realize that. And in my personal experience, having Vulcans like, Spock, and especially Data, watching Star Trek TNG, The Next Generation, was really useful for me to break out of some lingering aspects of the histrionic personality disorder that I was dealing with, which is a pushing away of your emotions and use logic. And it helps. It's quite amazing how much mental illness and bad feelings you can slough off if you use objective, reasonable reality, if you look for proofs of things. It's just so easy to get stuck in a negative spiral and to see all these proofs of how, everybody hates you, and your brain preferentially picks things that are negative. That's kind of how our brain works sometimes. It remembers negative things way more than positive things. And so you have to realize that it is an instinctual, emotional you're stuck in. And by focusing on reality, focusing on things you can that are objectively true, if you think about whatever you're thinking about as if it was another person. Think of it as just an interaction or a thought pattern or whatever, just by itself in a vacuum. And then you can start seeing faults with it. Whenever you think of yourself, you're somehow blind to those things. But if you just think of it as another person, or if your friend was telling you these things, what would you say? What would you think? That works really well. Sort of get rid of your own bias, because we have.
Sorry, I was just saying, like, that was really, really well said. And I just wanted to kind of add something to what we were kind of talking about before too, just like with what Hannah was also saying earlier about how, like, people with disabilities, they really can be truly inspiring, because they have to overcome a lot of things that able-bodied people just don't, and a lot of them do so with surprising, like, gosh, words are eluding me tonight. I'm just, it's amazing what people can accomplish even when they have to overcome so much. But one thing that I had also wanted to mention was when people are diagnosed with, say, like liver problems or arthritis or cancer or anything like that, we don't view that diagnosis as a negative, like that they don't become a more bad person because they have that diagnosis. So with my discussion about the term disability before, we shouldn't see people with disabilities as bad people.
That's less valuable.
There's less value of people, right? Like, that's basically what I was trying to get at. I don't like the idea that we should be having this focus on them as though, like, they're treated like bad people. They should not be treated like bad people, because they can accomplish amazing things. They are often amazing people. They're often so humble of people as well. Like, all the people that I know who have a disability in my life are just the most amazing, wonderful people.
Yeah, that tends to happen, which is unfortunately you end up experiencing groups of so for instance, men and women commit suicide at different rates. Men are 5 times more likely to die from suicide. However, more women attempt suicide. So what does that mean? As a psychologist, etc., frequently a person who wants to die, they will not tell anyone, and then they will go through with it. So people don't necessarily go through with it, or just attempt and survive, or talk a lot about it beforehand and stuff like that. It can be seen as a flag of something is, we need to give this person some care. But it is seen as, more of a cry for help than necessarily an actual proof that they're going to do it, if that makes sense. So we do have an element. It's really difficult to talk about, because at one point do you say that someone's faking it, or that someone, like, can you really make that distinction? But as a mental health caregiver, or in psychology or neuroscience, we do need to sort of differentiate when someone may have something else going on, and they're just trying to, let people know of its suicidal, ideations or words or whatever, or attempted suicides, versus people who are actually suicidal and they fucking kill themselves like most men do. So this kind of brings it around to the point of disability, or feeling like, or saying that, you're not as capable as you are. Sometimes, and I don't really want to throw anyone under the bus, but there are subgroups of women, more also cluster B personality disorder. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with them, but it may be what's wrong with them is not what they present or what they say. And so there's an element of knowing what is going on. These people are real, or do they have something else going on and they just don't really pay attention to it, or are they just looking for attention? And it's really, really horrible thing to think about, but because we frequently have subgroups of women, and specifically women, use resources intended for victims when they're not victims themselves. This happens often, and in fact, we have even centrists now who realize, people who are not necessarily anti-feminist, who look at all of these fake rape claims and they are really upset at these people for saying these things, because it takes away credibility and resources and actual genuine care from people who do. I did have a point. I don't remember what it is anymore because of all my equivocations. But what was the last thing you said, Prim? It really went off of that. Where the idea was. Go ahead. Yeah,
the idea was basically just that we don't treat people with other diagnoses as bad people. So why would we treat disabled people any differently? Like it's not the fact that they're labeled as disabled that's the problem. It's if people treat them negatively because of that, that's the problem.
Yes, and you were talking about good people in your life who had disabilities. Now, I was just going to say that's what it was. It was a marker of, in my personal experience, and otherwise, I know I'm very close with someone who has severe problems just being a normal human physically, and they hide it because they're a man and they know that there's no compassion there. Nobody gives a fuck, especially, when you have other factors that people consider to be positive, and then you're like, well, you can't possibly have anything wrong with you because you don't look sick. So and it's been a growing resentment, just avalanche inside me about that, and I sometimes sort of take it out on people. Not really take it out, but it adds to the fire, where I see people, women, most frequently, in fact all the time, with subgroups of women who claim that there's something wrong with them, or that they, oh, my pinky hurts, or, like my hair aches every morning, stuff like that. And it just really drives me insane, because you have these people that have gotten themselves into either hypochondriacs, or have just built a neurosis up by constantly having a feedback loop of focusing on every little tiny ache and pain that exists as being a human, and then they can't shut up about it all the time. And that it really, really bothers me, because it takes away credibility from people who actually have disorders. And anytime you have somebody who's like mopey and upset all the time and just constantly miserable, in fact, those are usually not the people serious, especially in my experience. I'm not saying that you can't be sad or aren't sad or whatever when you have a disability, not at all, but I'm talking about as a general attitude. I have seen exclusively people with disabilities are with serious, like where they have to like fight to get out of the bed in the morning, where they, just serious stuff. They are the kindest, softest, least letting their whatever out on people, individuals that I've ever met. In fact, what people with true disabilities do, and could be something that you can use as a marker to, because we all have only, we have so much reserve for compassion, and we have only so much that we can do for other people, and that's why it's so upsetting whenever resources are being taken up by fakers. And how do you separate that? How do you make this arbitrary decision of, well, you truly have a disability and you don't? I mean, you can't. It's really, really, really hard. And so I got lost in those equivocations before. I was like, because it's really hard. You can't just make a random assumption that faking it. You have to have a lot of information. You have to know for sure. And even then, like, should you even be making that decision? But as someone who has seen men suffer in silence, and women suffer in silence, and nobody even knows that they have a disability because they try so hard to make the best out of their life. And then you have another group that does nothing but gobble up resources and is just constantly keeping themselves unnecessarily in this mire of negativity that they're sort of adding to by constantly having their brain loop through it, and they're giving themselves disorders and mental conditions by, you know, nobody breaking them out of that. But most of the time when people have a true disability, they're already in pain, they already hurt, everything already sucks, so they will try to see every moment that they can as good. Every moment when there is something positive, they will try to make the most of it. And somehow, I don't know how, but I've experienced the same thing, that every individual in my life that has had a serious disability was kind, loving, giving, the opposite of what you would think someone who's suffering. And so it's just an interesting little counterintuitive moment where those who are super focused on themselves and want everyone to focus on them are usually not the ones that have something super seriously wrong with them in that sense. I mean, they may have a histrionic personality, they may have actually something going on. I mean, they're not super well adjusted, but it's not what they say it is. And it's unfortunate because it takes away from the credibility of so many people with disabilities. It especially people who are, you know, younger, look a certain way, or who have a particular disorder that is somewhat amorphous to the point where a lot of other people who don't really want to pretend that something's wrong with them, they just use as, it's like, oh, I have that. And then everybody who has that ends up being, oh, you don't have a real disorder because of these, you know, 20,000 fakers. And it's really difficult to talk about this. How do you determine who fakes and who doesn't? Should we even care about it, you know? But with how much, you know, with how things go and how undersung male issues are, it grinds my gears. I get to a point where I'm just like, stop. we need to recognize.
I definitely get where you're coming from. Like, I mean, generally, I try not to make judgments about like who's being like who quote unquote honestly has a disorder or who doesn't, or who is just like, I don't know, maybe hamming it up. But I try not to make judgments on those people. But like the main thing that really bothers me is when people have some kind of condition like depression or bipolar disorder or any of the personality disorders, and then they try and make it out like, oh, this thing that clearly affects both men and women, this is a woman's issue. Mm-hmm. It's kind of bringing it back to the Women's March post. Like it's ridiculous that we should treat this gender neutral thing that adversely affects a lot of different people, that we should try and work for services for all people, but they're talking about it as though it's something that we should only focus on women on. Why is this a thing that we should only focus on women on? That doesn't make any sense.
And that's something that I wanted to point to, you know, with Anna bringing up the fact that, you know, there's a situation of women who fake it and are using services that are supposed to be for serious situations.
Women.
Yeah, it's almost exclusively women. One of the things I wanted to bring it back to was at the beginning of the opening monologue. I brought up the Time.com article that I'd found that said that violence against disabled women was being ignored in several countries. And then when I looked into it, it turned out violence against the disabled was harder to address in several countries, and they weren't equipped to handle the unique challenges the disabled face in reporting violence and in being believed. Because a lot of times, you know, if you have a caregiver that is the person who is the abuser, the caregiver actually can convince people at times, well, they lie all the time, you know, and stuff like that.
We just naturally side with able.
Right.
One of those things.
But this was a genderless problem in terms of it happened to both sexes. And when I really looked into it, it turned out that there were areas in which men were more disadvantaged because of the perception. Disabled men are often perceived as more able than equally disabled women. If that, it's the same as I guess the rest of all the other aspects of life. Able-bodied men are perceived as more able than equally able-bodied women as well. So you have this situation where they go into a place that they would be seeking help. A lot of times the resources are specifically dedicated for women, or a lot of times the resources are extremely limited. And in either case, men have a harder time getting help in both situations. And when it comes to abuse, that adds a layer of men having a hard time getting help.
Absolutely.
And you know what really busts my ass about the whole thing is that people would argue that, men are seen as bodied because men are more respected, so therefore that must be it. It's men are stronger, men are better, therefore this is a feminist issue.
Yeah, they twist everything.
Pretty much anything you want in order to fit that narrative if you try hard enough.
Well, that really goes with what the sort of underscore, the bottom line of my frustration is that you end up having a disregard and disrespect for disabled people because of those who, are like, oh, I can't lift this pillow because my joints hurt. And you're like, you're a 22-year-old woman. What do you know? No, stop. But because of that, we end up seeing actual people with disabilities as weak. We are like, because we have frequently, I just want to really get it across that people with genuine, true disabilities, you got to claw that information out of them. There is shame and a variety of things that people with disabilities experience where they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to let you know that there's something wrong. When there's something wrong with them, they're like, no, I'm going to push this away. And also they need that sometimes to just even get through the day. They need to completely ignore that there's something wrong with them and defocus away from that so it doesn't even come up in their cognition. And so because of that, you have this big divide between people who actually have disabilities and they barely ever talk about it, and you have to like really get to know them to even find out about it. And then people who talk about it, actually doctors, there's nothing there. And it's difficult to talk about that because like, what is a person's pain meter? Like, how can you tell when someone has a problem and when they don't? But in my experience, I've found that people are weak-willed and try to, young women and etc., who basically want the world to do everything for them, they will not shut up about this little thing, that thing, this, that. And so you have a society of looking at these people, the loud ones. The squeaky wheel is not the genuine wheel. And so you have so many squeaky wheels and everybody's paying attention to them and then going, oh, you're just a bunch of fucking pussies. Everyone with a disability is a fucking dumb weakling. It's like, yeah, no, you're not actually interacting with people with actual disabilities. Those people are the strongest motherfuckers you have ever met. You have no idea how much strength it takes to get through the day when you have disabilities. And it particularly frustrates me that because of the squeaky wheel situation, we end up all the lack of value and all the denigrating ideas we have about people with disabilities is because of those who are, skewing people's understanding of what it actually means, what people with disabilities actually are like. They're fucking fighters. They don't complain. They push through when they shouldn't. So it's just grr. And it's just so disproportionately men, and especially like I said, when they're abused or whatnot, that adds another layer of them pushing it away, and we just never get to see what a person with disability looks like.
Yeah, there's actually one thing that was brought up in the initial intro video that I had also wanted to speak to as well. It was just talking about like violence against like disabled women and how it's more prevalent against disabled women than against able-bodied women. And there's actually a study that was also talking about the prevalence of violence against men with disabilities as well. And indeed, men who have disabilities also face increased levels of violence relative to able-bodied men. So it's kind of pointless to say that this is strictly a female issue, because this study specifically says men with disabilities are at heightened risk for lifetime and current sexual violence compared with men without disabilities. It's
almost like it's the people with vulnerabilities that are targeted instead of any other metric. Huh.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like, the funny thing is, though, is that they'll then go on to say, oh, you know, it's not as much, men don't suffer as much violence, and when they do, it's usually from other men. But then there's another study that I've got that talks about, like, sexual victimization perpetrated by women, and how, oh my goodness, it's surprisingly high prevalence. And I mean, like, it shouldn't be seen as surprising that this is the case. Like, we've seen many examples where this is the case. But unfortunately, this study goes on to say, oh, well, you know, it's just because women are seen as being weak and non-dominant and submissive. So really, it's a women's issue that women are not being seen as perpetrators of violence, because they're not treated as credible as men or something like that. And it's like, it's even the studies that are basically proving our point, that are saying that men are victims too, that women can be abusers, and that we should do something about it. Even those studies are talking about how that in itself is a woman's issue. It kind of seems almost insurmountable, but you know, that's what we're here for. That's what we're here. We're here to talk about this. We're here to highlight these issues. It's like, you know, let's focus on the male victims for a change as well, right? Like, it's not just a women's issue. Disabilities is not just a woman's issue. Violence is not a violence against women issue. These are issues that women and men face, and men need to be acknowledged. Men deserve to be acknowledged. Men's issues deserve to have this attention brought on them.
You know, it really helps if I unmute when I want to talk. Sorry about that. This is actually one of the things that really sort of led me to want to go over the Women's March in their talking points, was the fact that they do this with every single issue, and it's infuriating. And it's actually, it really, in my opinion, detracts from the seriousness of the idea of women's issues in general. Because, well, what if they're doing that with every single issue? What if there's not a single actual, real, genuine women's issue in all of feminism? Maybe they are all human issues that feminism has decided to narrow down to just women, and assume that nobody but women who experience the issue matters. And if that's the case, and it looks like it's the case based on their talking points, then, you know, it's pretty solid to conclude that feminism is entirely unnecessary and may actually be preventing society from moving forward. And I think we have some super chats that I had not read at this point, because we kind of got a little off kilter and reading things in order and so on. Yeah. So if I missed people, I'm going to apologize for that. I will see if I can find the ones in our chat. I know we had a couple of them. Ginger Socrates gave us $2 and said shilling shekels, with the S's being dollar signs, to trigger Panina Chan. Then we also had Black Knight Fool gave us $20 Canadian, who also said to trigger Panina. And then we have Gator and Frog.
A $2 and a $5 Karen versus Medical.
Yeah, Gator and Frog gave us $2 Canadian, said, God, Medicare versus lame Karen 2016, and John Taylor gave us, those are pounds, £2, and says, we want you to be okay, Joey Jojo. I think I might have read that one already. If I read it twice, well, you got double value, but we all want Joey Jojo to be okay. And like I said, we are working in the background to try to find what we can do to help Joey. Let's see, I think I read that one. And then we have J.O. Balls gave us $5 and said, deaf culture was my first big encounter with SJW, like thought. And there is that as well. I've run into some SJW thought in that area as well. Among other things, if there's a difference in deaf culture in whether you read lips or whether you don't read lips, that there's sort of some prejudices that go back and forth between those two groups because of being able to essentially not necessarily pass for hearing, but in order to be able to interact with people who are hearing who don't speak sign language, reading lips and speaking out loud is kind of essential, and that can be a divider in that community, and I've seen it go both ways, and both sides of that argument act like the other side is the only side being mean. So that is kind of a SJW-like thought, because the SJW-like thought in the end is my perspective is the only one that matters.
There was one super chat that kind of got missed.
Got lost. There it is.
I'm just gonna go back to it because it kind of goes along with the one that I just posted that we also kind of got missed. Things got a little squirrely there. Yeah. But Polaris589 had initially given us $5 and said, someone buy Joey Joe a prostitute, but then he gave us another $10 and said, I was just joking about my last super chat. Seriously, please get some help before you do something permanent, Joey Jojo. And yeah, like Hannah said, we're doing what we can on the back end to try and figure out what we can do to help him. So I really hope that we can get to him in time. Like we've had some success with helping people in this regard in the past. And like I said, I've had some experience with volunteering and working with the crisis hotline. So we've got it figured here. We're trying our best.
And this is something that, at the other end of this, I'm going to say, you know, Anna had talked about people who, you know, say they're going to do things and they're not. If you know, you're listening to the show, anybody that's listening to the show, if you have a habit of doing that, and I think most of our listeners really don't, but you got to know that in a group like ours, the response is going to be to try to find out, you know, what we can do to stop that from happening. And so it's basically the same thing that I had active shooter training this week. And one of the things they went over was the fact that now, if a high school student jokes about shooting up their school online, there's going to be a police visit to their house. This is the same situation. You can't troll people with talk about self-harm online anymore, because there is essentially an epidemic of suicide. I would say the proportions of suicide that are happening and self-harm that are happening in our society today are such that it's not outrageous to call it an epidemic. And this is a situation where you can't joke about it online. You know, you can't troll somebody with that.
This. And we've talked about this in the past on like previous shows, like men's suicide and how this is a serious issue. And it's really sad that so many men are being driven to this because they just don't have hope in their life anymore. And it's a real shame that this is something that's becoming so common. I know there's only so much you can do to help that, but we're doing everything that we can to try and help that where we can.
Yeah, so this is, like I said, this is a double-edged sword. It's one where this isn't something you can ignore, and there is a danger in sending a wellness visit as well. And it's a rough situation. So for future reference, you know, don't troll people with that. And don't ignore it if you see somebody, you got to say something. It's one of those situations where you never know. And this you hear with suicides and with other avenues of self-harm all the time. People will say, well, we didn't know, and then they'll look back and there's been stuff like this, and, well, we didn't take it seriously. You got to take it seriously. You always got to take it seriously. You know, and until you encounter somebody where you've taken it seriously repeatedly and it's turned out to not be serious, that's the avenue you have to go. So that's the avenue we're going. Xerinx gave us $10 and said, from what I read concerning feminism's origin, it looks as though it was one man's utilization of women as victims to give himself an excuse to not marry while maintaining virtue as the one good man. And then Darth Elwin gave us $10 and said, especially when autistic men are often interpreted as misogynistic for being pedantic, it is easy to look for men to start to feel social isolation and lose hope, especially the disabled ones. This is something else. And I'm going to, if I got it to actually load up. Okay, here we go. A while back I wrote something, and this is actually with regards to chronic pain. There's another crisis taking place with disabilities in the United States. We have an opiate abuse epidemic. That is not to be ignored. We also have a chronic pain patient abuse epidemic in response to the opiate epidemic. And this is a rough one for me to talk about because I've got chronic pain patients in my family that have been directly impacted by this. Responsible chronic pain patients who use their medicine responsibly, who strive to work with a medical community monitoring them to help them ensure that their use of pain medication is functional and helps them improve their quality of life without putting them at risk, at serious risk for addiction, are being just as targeted as people who don't act responsibly and just use the medicine to get high. And you have this situation where you end up with somebody who they don't have the help they need, they don't have the medical treatment they need in order to basically have the quality of life that an ordinary person should have. And it's very difficult to, from the outside, to know what a person in a situation is going through. But one thing that you can do, like a lot of times people will pull away from somebody when they're going through something like this. And the thing that needs to happen is the opposite. And this is something that, like with women in this situation, there's a degree of sympathy that there isn't for men. It's still limited. People will still turn their backs on a woman with chronic pain because she's hard to deal with, but not as much as they do it to men. And when chronic pain is the assault a guy is under, and he's young, it just absolutely is devastating to his social life. And the younger the guy, the harder it is for people to deal with him. The more likely people are to treat him like a liar or a layabout or a lunatic. And that is, chronic physical pain and chronic mental pain can affect the same way. People are more likely to avoid him than check on him or include him in social activities, often out of discomfort with the situation and their ability to make a perceivable difference in it. And what people don't realize is there are differences you can make. They're not always the ones you're looking for. The chronic pain sufferer in your life, the depression sufferer in your life, the person going through something insurmountable in your life. They know you can't pay their bills. They know you can't get rid of their pain. They know you can't become their caregivers. Those things are too big for one individual. You don't let the discomfort with your inability to fix everything become a reason for you to contribute to that person's isolation, when that is the thing that you do have the power to affect. And even if it's in little ways, right? You keep in contact. Even if all you do, maybe you're the guy that you have a meme war with this guy going on, that just every so often you send each other stuff. Maybe that's your role. Don't let the time in between days you can visit keep you from checking in on somebody periodically. So you haven't been there in a month. That means it's about time to go. Not, gosh, I got to figure out how to apologize because I haven't been there in a month. And, you know, your friends, your folks, they know you have work. They know you have family. They know that you get caught up in things, and they know you get exhausted. There's no law that says you can't visit again because you missed some invisible deadline. Don't feel like you got to be upbeat all the time or make your friend upbeat. Your life isn't all shits and giggles. Don't expect his to be either. You know, and this is another one. It hurts is his reality. It hurts. It's rough. It sucks. This is no fun. You know, the reality of dealing with a chronic pain disorder, dealing with a chronic psychological pain disorder, dealing with grief, dealing with a situation of hardship, dealing with maybe you've got somebody that's going through a vexatious litigation situation like my friends have. Sometimes just having someone else know makes it more bearable, even if you don't have some profound words of wisdom to make it so. Sometimes that sucks, man, I wish there was something I could do, can be profound enough, because it lets the person know that you give a shit. And if he makes, you know, gallows jokes, let him laugh. Let him, you know, make fun of his situation. Laugh with him, or groan if it's a groaner. You know, gallows humor is how you process experiences that would otherwise be emotionally crippling. One great example, Milo Yiannopoulos made a gallows joke about the priest that molested him, and too many people took it seriously. That is the essence of gallows humor. That you poke fun at your demons. And you poke fun at your demons because that's how you make them smaller. You know, just having a loved one understand that can be immeasurable. Listening without judgment can be immeasurable. It can make a huge difference. And it may be frustratingly invisible. You may not feel like you did anything. But pain is invisible. And it does a hell of a lot. You know, and you know, sometimes you'll come up with things that are measurable that you can do. Maybe somebody's in too much pain to drive themselves to the grocery store, but they could go if you drove them. You know, maybe somebody just needs somebody to pick up a gallon of milk for them. Maybe somebody needs you to sit with them when they go deal with the Social Security Administration, because those bureaucrats will run him over if he doesn't have a friend there to witness their behavior. Or maybe your friend goes to a medical clinic that doesn't believe that he's dealing with what he's dealing with. You know, or they treat him like an addict, or they treat him like a problem. You know, maybe your friend needs to get out of the house and doesn't want to, and needs somebody to prod him into it. You know, and basically, it's just the same thing as you would do with any other friend. Be a buddy. And that's the kind of thing with the person that's hard to hang out with. That's the kind of thing that it takes to help drag them out of these types of situations. You got nervous energy to deal with because of the situation? Yeah. It sucks to see somebody suffering and you can't do anything about it. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be angry, worried, antsy. It's even okay to resent the problem, as long as you recognize that you feel that way because you're frustrated dealing with this. You can't get rid of his pain. So what? You can't be his doctor, his housekeeper, his nurse. So what? Maybe you feel like sitting around his house playing video games with him, or watching TV, or including him in your outings isn't enough. Well, you're full of shit. That's wrong. You're wrong for feeling that way or thinking that way. You don't have to be everything. Your need to help, though, can be fuel for activism. You can, look at your friend's situation. Is there law getting in the way? Is there something within the system that he has to deal with that is actually handicapping him worse? Write to your legislators. Write to the administration of the system that he has to deal with, the particular system that he has to deal with. Does he go into the VA and is he getting stymied when he's asking for mental health help? Go over their heads. But that's the situation. That's the thing that I wanted to get out with this. Women have system after system after system advocating for them in the world. Men have each other. And so my admonition, my lecture, I guess on this is, when you look around you and you see a man going through something that he's not getting help with and he needs it, you don't have to stick your neck out, just your hand.
Well said.
With that, does anybody else have any further additions to this particular episode?
There are actually 3 more super chats.
Okay, well, we're in.
I can start with the one that got missed here.
Okay.
Bob Weld gave us US $5 and said, "Happy I finally have an opportunity to donate. I recognize Joey Jojo's name and I'm sorry he is going through this." And I mean, thank you very much for donating. Again, we really appreciate that. You don't have to, but I'm sure like Joey Jojo appreciates the support that he's been getting in this thread, and we support him too. So thank you for that message. Zaranx gave us US $10 and said, "The possible idea that Charles Fourier inadvertently created a movement that fractured male-female relationships to avoid marriage actually annoys me, especially in light of Joey Jojo. I hope Joey's okay."
Well, the only thing I know about Fourier is the Fourier transform thing. But, you guys want to check out Cherry Stem Feminism, it's on my Patreon, free for people to watch and put in their RSS players. So, actually, CIA funded this magazine in glorious time. So, so feminism may be just a giant psyop. And, of course, we blame moral relativism for a lot of the problems that are postmodernism related, and it is all relative. Everything's relative, and only my opinion matters. Well, a lot of that can be tied to actual relativity, and that's something that Richard Rawl is, and with my help, is actually working to tackle, not just for free energy, but also how that will affect the relationship between men and women, and just in general, our relationship with reality that has been fractured so highly by postmodernism. And actually, we're going to be doing a Cherry Stem episode this month from Clockwork Alchemy convention. In fact, it'll be 3 days of panels that'll be streamed. And if you guys are interested in physics, relativity, or any of that, definitely check that out.
All right. And we have one more. Hoki Bukisa gave us $5 and said, "The way forward is painful, but you are strong and you don't have to do it alone. Also, the Abyss already has you for eternity, so what's the rush?" That's a good point. I also want to weigh in on the Charles Fourier thing. The one thing I learned about him is that he was the biggest thing I learned about him, I guess, is that he was a failed commune creator. Like the various communes that he created, some of them lasted a shorter time, some of them lasted a longer time. None of them are around anymore. I know one of them burned down. But he is the guy that coined the use of the term feminism to describe the political movement, feminism. Prior to that, it had gone out of fashion to use the word feminism at all. But before it went out of fashion to use the word feminism, it was just a synonym for femininity. So there's your trivia for the night. But do check out Cherry Stem, and do check out also, is it cherrystem.com?
It will be eventually, but currently it is patreon.com/annacherry, and you post. Okay. Or click the Cherry Stem tag there, should be. And then also on YouTube, and we're moving on to Twitch now.
Okay, excellent. And do check those out. And with that, I am going to thank everybody who listened. I'm going to thank also everybody that is involved in the creation of the show, my co-hosts, everybody that has been involved in the making of the opening video. I will say the cringy sound on that video was my fault. I know exactly what I screwed up, and so it won't happen again. So don't blame our volunteers for that. That was my dumbass. And with that, Like I said, thank you all, and good night.